So why are we going to talk about discipline today? Does somebody want to read this beautiful quote from Dr. Montessori? And forgive me, I am suffering from crazy allergies right now. It's the changing of the season, so I have lots of tissues.
So can I read it?
Oh, please.
To let the child do as he likes when he has not yet developed any powers of control is to betray the idea of freedom. Dr. Montessori, The Observant Mind.
So for us, we have to really be cognizant that children don't, as much as Montessori is about giving freedom with responsibility, we also have to help them build the emotional intelligence and their self-control to be able to operate as a really self-disciplined human being and operate with discipline, right? So we have to start with that in mind. I worked from 2 books, No Drama Discipline. For those of you who have parents in your classroom who are looking for a book on discipline, I highly, highly recommend both of these. They're easy to read. The workbook actually does have quite a bit that's not in the first book. It has activities. So I really, really recommend these. And any of you who are working with discipline issues and maybe are feeling frustrated with a child or you're not sure how to deal with the situation, these are a great place to start. So setting our intention together. I just love this picture of Beth with all these little people. So our commitment today is to create a safe space for each other. We want it to be a place that you all feel comfortable saying, wait, I don't get that, or wait a second, I don't understand that, or wait, that doesn't make sense to me, and that there's really no judgment, there's no criticism. It's just a community coming together to really solidify an idea that underscores who we are as a community. We want to enjoy our time together and enjoy our time with each other. So I would love for there to be a lot of humor and laughter and joy and connection present here today, and really to create a clear framework for the discipline for the school community. Is there anything else we want to get out of our time together today? And I can only see 4 of you. So Margaret, will you be the queen of the chat?
Sure.
That would be great. And if anybody also wants to raise their hand, I think that pops up down on the bottom of my screen.
Sherry White just wrote in the chat that we have those books in the school library. So that's nice to know.
Great, thank you. I wish I'd borrowed well, no, I'll use them. Anyway, okay, so does everybody think that intention, does that align with everyone and how you want to spend your time? Great. So we're gonna do a breakout room for this. So I'm going to send you guys into breakout rooms. What does discipline mean to you? Now, you may have a different version of what discipline means now, but how are you disciplined growing up? And that may have evolved into how you discipline now. And what do you think of when you think of disciplining a child? Those are your 2 questions. We're going to go into breakout rooms for about 4 minutes, so you have the opportunity to really start talking and thinking about that yourself, okay? Breakout rooms. Okay, so you have a framework for your own experience. Anybody want to share their experience when they were growing up? Yeah, Jasmine. The one hand I can see.
So I was telling the ladies that I was in a breakout room with that my family is Southern and very traditional. So even though my mom actually kind of broke away from some of those traditional practices of discipline, there was still some elements of it left behind. So she grew up in the children are seen and not heard. You don't have an opinion. You have nothing to say. Who are you? You're a child. You have no thoughts. So she broke away from that, but still kept a lot of the action consequence sequence of events, like, if you do this, this will happen. But the thing that she did differently was she did create a line of communication that she didn't have with her parents. You don't really you don't have an opinion, your child. So she changed that for me. And the thing that I had to, or this is my first year of Montessori, so the thing that I had to get over was kind of like a development of that. I've had a lot of students tell me they don't feel like doing something, which is so against everything I've ever known. Like, what do you mean you don't feel like doing? So I've had to try to, I could tell that because I heard it more than once, I could tell it was something that the students were is a part of the process. Like they're used to being able to voice, like, I don't want to do that right now. So so getting over that internally has been difficult, but I was able to fall back on that open line of communication. Well, okay, why don't you want to do that? Like, what do you want to do? So I was able to kind of bring those two, the past and the present, together.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. And you're really aware, and your mom, it sounds like your mom was really aware of the framework. So many of us come up in frameworks that we're not really conscious of. Like, we don't actually consider how our parents parented us, right? So anyone else want to share? Karen?
Yes, I just wanted to comment in something that Allison said, that discipline, it can be, in these days, it means a good word, like a positive word. Whereas in the past, discipline means more like punishment and physical punishment. That's why I grew up and it was normal those days. So, but what we understand now is that discipline is a good word, it's a positive word, because it's to put boundaries and limits, and also it's to explain them why. It's important for them to know, why are you doing this, and why, it's not acceptable, and what do you want them to change, and also for them to think by themselves, what can I do better? Or what other choice can I take that is not going to change this consequence? So that was something
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. And I think if we can, I will tell you, when I bring in parents, they're not quite where you are with the word yet. For not, for sure, not all. There are many who are on this journey already, but some are still in. Like, I had a dad actually walk into my office a couple of years ago. I had his son in 6-year seminar, and he said, well, I'm going to spank him for that. And I was like, oh, could we talk about that a little bit? Like, so let's dig in here. Let's have a conversation, because that was still how he thought. I mean, in his world, he was doing his job, right, as a parent, and offering discipline in that way. So beautiful, beautiful, the transition in the word. Anyone else? Okay, great. This small again. All right, so
Tamara, I don't want to monopolize, but just based off what Karen was saying, I just thought to myself, like, why do we think of discipline as punishment when it comes to children, but when it comes to ourselves, we think of it as like making a good choice, but despite the fact I don't feel like it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a revelation for me.
Yeah, well, and actually in here, we're going to talk about that, like a little bit about how we have a double standard for them, right? It's a double standard. Right. Okay, so what do you do now if, and this, we're just going to talk, have a couple people share, if a child doesn't follow instructions, how do you handle it? If a child is angry, if a child's physically aggressive, if a child is unkind to another child. Actually, let's not share right away. Does everybody have paper and something to write with? Could you just take a few notes for yourself and do a little self-reflection? We'll take 2 minutes and have some self-reflection on, like, how do you do now? I want you to think about what it is that triggers you. Like, do you know what I mean by triggers? Like, sets you off or makes you tense, or where you feel it in your body, what gets you in your chest. What, and think about those kind of really hard moments for you, and what is it that you do in those moments that you may not be so proud of, right? And we don't need to share it, but like, what are those pieces for you? we're going to keep moving. So the origin of the word discipline, this is so interesting. So there are two versions, right? And I think somebody was just talking about kind of how they grew up with one version. The first one, the Middle English, in the sense of mortification by scourging oneself. Like they're literally making themselves physically hurting themselves as a piece of discipline, right? And it's interesting because I think that often gets translated into our world, is that's if you're not disciplining, if the child's not punished, if the child's not, upset, then it's not actually discipline, right? Now the other approach to discipline, the other definition, is instruction and knowledge, and obviously that's the that's the Montessori approach, right? Is that really that discipline is equals education, right? And so that's really what the framework of today is having discipline be education for the children. So what are your goals? And this is, again, something for you to write down, just 60 seconds. What are your goals for discipline when you're working with a misbehaving child? Okay, anyone want to share their goals for discipline when they're working with a misbehaving child? Yeah,
My
Brad.
goal?
Oh, Brad, and then Lydia. How about that? And then Shannon.
My goal when applying discipline to a misbehaving child is to permanently modify their behavior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, great. How about
Same.
you? Yeah. Okay,
To make this behavior less likely to happen again.
perfect. And how about you, Shannon? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, to restore peace and connection with the child.
Mm-hmm. Restore peace and connection. Okay, great. Anyone else? I can only see one page, so.
This is Danusha. I have something.
Okay.
So when something's happening, I like to try and turn it into a teachable moment.
Mm-hmm.
What they can learn out of it.
Okay, perfect. Sharon, how about you?
Yes, I had kind of goes along with Shannon's peace with mutual understanding.
Beautiful. Okay.
I wrote down stay calm, connect with the child, make it a teachable moment, not a punishment, and don't make the child feel wrong.
Yeah, that's a big one, and it's actually really hard to do that. Is to not have them feel shame or feel wrong. Except for with Georgie. Georgie doesn't ever actually feel wrong about anything.
Amber, I also had patience and empathy.
Patience and empathy. Beautiful. Okay. There are 4 goals according to No Drama Discipline: changing the behavior, which you guys hit on. But building the brain is actually one of the goals of discipline. Building skills, like Ross Green talks about, is helping the child build the skills they need to be successful. And then developing self-discipline. right? So there are 4 really main goals to discipline as we move through. So one of the pieces we have to be responsible for when we start out is what the brain that we're bringing to the situation, right? So we have a reactive brain and we have a responsive brain, and the reactive brain comes out of our amygdala, and the amygdala gets engaged when and we go to fight or flight. Now what's interesting is even with a person who's 2 years old and very, very small, you would not think that your amygdala would get engaged, right? Because really what is it that's coming at us that would have us feel a sense of fear or upset or fragility? But it doesn't matter. We still get triggered. We still get engaged. We still become emotionally reactive. And what actually has to happen for us is we have to have our responsive brain engaged in order to be able to work with the child to build the 4 goals we just talked about. We can't actually build, there's no building skills, there's no sense of connection, there's no self-discipline that ever comes out of our reactive brain, right? So if we are triggered, then the situation is we're going to lose the situation if we step right into it in that moment. Okay, so part of what we want to talk about today is kind of how our brain operates out of both of these. And I'm not going to read these. I'm going to have you guys read them out loud. So is there somebody who'd volunteer to read the first top left, the autopilot reactiveness?
An automatic response to stimuli without reflection or intention on your part.
Okay, so that's your reactive nature. And then when we get into responsiveness, we know we're in responsiveness because, and Brad, can I call on you? I can see you. Will you read that next one?
Sure. Making conscious decisions based on principles you've thought about and agreed upon beforehand.
Right. So getting really intentional, and that's a part of what today is about, is for us to decide together, what is our intention? How do we want to respond to discipline as a community moving forward? Lydia, I can see you too. Will you read the next quadrant?
A reaction to behavior without thought given to what you're trying to teach in the moment is the reactive brain. And the responsive brain would be to consider various options, then choose the one that engages a thoughtful approach toward the desired outcome.
That's right. That's right. And then the last one, Marcella, do you want to read those last 2?
Yes, so the autopilot can lead to overreaction on parents' part and may result in punishments or consequences that don't relate to the behavior in question. And the intentionality or responsive leads to clear behavioral boundaries, yes, and structure, and thus effective teaching and skill building in mind.
Okay, so clearly we want to be on the side of responsiveness, but that is much easier said than done, right? I think it helps for us to get really present to the impact when we're in reactions. So one of the things that you should know is the impact of stress on a child's brain. It truncates the neural pathways that they're building. It takes 20 minutes if they go to a space of feeling stressed. It takes about 20 minutes for them to recover. Their brain is not able to take in any additional information. They cannot learn, they cannot process during that 20 minutes. So anytime we go to a place where we're dominating or scolding or shaming or guilting or in any way leaving the child feeling a sense of stress, they can't actually learn during that time, okay? Sharon, I saw that you had a hand up. Did you want to?
Yes, I had a question about the consequences. do
Sure.
we no longer want to consider the use of natural consequences?
So we're going to get into that a little bit later, but we're not saying that there aren't natural consequences. If you don't get your shoes on to go outside and the rest of the class goes, the thing is, how do we as an adult talk about that? Is it, well, then you should have gotten your shoes on, right? Because that's the shaming piece, right?
Right.
And so what we're going to talk about is how do we approach the situation so that the child is able to learn. And I'm glad you said that, because as soon as we go to any kind of shame, any kind of domination, the child goes to a stress response and they are no longer actually learning the skill or learning the lesson in that moment. So that beautiful natural consequence that so naturally unfolded actually loses its power, often because of the way the adult addresses it. Does that make sense? So we're not saying there are no natural consequences. I mean, life is filled with natural consequences, and we don't protect the children from those because it's actually not a service to them, right? But it's really about how are we following up with the child during that moment? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for saying that, because that was an important distinction. Okay. All right. So the other thing that's really interesting, and this is true about parents and it's also true about educators, the child is wired to be able to trust. You have these primary people in their lives that they are supposed to trust. So what happens when the person who they're supposed to trust is actually giving them signals of domination or of shame or fear or any of that? It's called disorganized attachment, and the brain gets caught. Basically what Dan Siegel says is the brain starts to fracture, because you have a child who's going to the person that they're supposed to trust, and that person is evoking fear. So their instinct, their brain tells them, leave that person. But the person who they're supposed to attach to reinforce their safety is the person who's creating that fear. And so it becomes a loop, and they have now proven, and this is a piece of ACEs, and quite frankly, I think many people who, on our staff, I certainly had my own experiences about growing up. It's not something that's just the select few, right? It's if you are in a situation where the person that you're trusting is in any way treating you in a way that leaves you fearful or scared or stressed, then this can happen to the brain. So it's one of those things that we want to really be aware of. It leaves cortisol in the brain, which is toxic, and it really can inhibit the brain growth, and it engages the reactive part of the brain. Any comments or thoughts on that? Okay, so, and this, I loved this. What parents expect from timeouts is, we think, or educators, right, is, we'll separate them and give them time to think about what they've done. And actually what Tina Payne Bryson says is if the child has done something like this little girl has ripped, maybe she ripped somebody's picture, they're actually already experiencing an incredible amount of guilt that they're bringing to the situation themselves, or upset. When we come in and punish them, it changes their thinking from what they did wrong, and they start making us wrong. So it actually truncates their process. It stops the process of their self-reflection and their understanding that they did something wrong. And all of a sudden they're focused on the people who are punishing them and how awful they are. So This is not just about timeouts. This is about any time we come in with a punishment, it actually takes away from the child's ability to learn the lesson from what just happened, which is so interesting, right? Like that we think we're underscoring the lesson, and really we're removing the ability to have that for them to learn the lesson. Any thoughts, comments? You guys just jump in too, please. Let's make this a dialogue. I'm happy to hear.
I have a question.
Yeah, Jasmine.
I'm thinking about this, and I guess my question would be, if the natural consequence, so for example, the little girl in this picture, she ripped a picture, and if the natural consequence isn't something that directly affects the child because they're still developing their skills in empathy, how do you teach them not to do things that don't have negative consequences for them? They have negative consequences for other people.
Great. So we're going to get into that for sure. That's a piece of this today, but just the answer is that we have to have them get present to okay, first of all, for toddlers, it's different, right? And I have some slides on that, just how quick it has to be with them. But really what we want to do is acknowledge how they feel in that moment. It looks like you're really upset, right? And then have them, once their brain, because they're going to be reactive in that moment, when their brain can move, because when they feel your empathy, they're going to be able to move into a brain that can actually think about other people. They can't think about other people when they're in the reactive brain. So we really you may have to wait for some time until their reactionary brain is disengaged, and then you get to talk about the ripped picture and say, how do you think Susie felt when the picture got ripped? And you build their emotional intelligence in that moment. Does that make sense? It does.
I think
it's a very different approach. It's really looking at the brain science about how people build skills.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I'm glad that you said we're going to talk more about it, because I think I could glean more from it. But
there's so much.
Yeah.
There's so much. And I'm going to send out some other resources for people who want to dig in more. Like Tina Payne Bryson's got a great 20-minute YouTube video that I think really underscores this really well. I've got an article and I'll keep sending out things, and then we'll stay in the conversation as well. Okay. Great question. And actually, I just want to add this one piece. I talked about this yesterday with the elementary team, but as you're supporting children in thinking about what they've done, right, and the impact on community, it's really important that we always bring in the community to the conversation, because one of the things that happens with children who have, like, for example, a child's running and you say, wait a second, we walk in the classroom, I don't want you to fall down and get hurt. If we always focus on the child as the individual rather than saying, I don't want you to fall and someone to trip over you, it's again all about them. And we are living in a culture that is very individual centered. As far as I can tell, Montessori is one of the antidotes to that. There are a lot of organizations that are doing work around this, but we actually have to have children be conscious of community. So as you're working with children, you're going to want to bring community into the conversation in any way you can, because it continually reinforces their impact on the community and has them really raises their consciousness, and really that's a piece of what builds that emotional intelligence, which we're not going to really delve into emotional intelligence today, but that is a piece that I'd like to get into later this year. So great question. Anyone else? No? Okay. All right. So generating responsiveness, so we always have to start with the adult. You know, Dr. Montessori tells us we always have to start with the adult. So short-term tools for helping you become responsive when you're feeling reactive. So the first thing we all have to do is really get present to when we're reactive. I even noticed before starting today, I was feeling really tense, right? And I told you all I was nervous. But I was feeling tense. I was feeling, and I snapped at my husband, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." But it was because I was in a reactive mode, right? I was wound up. So we have to really pay attention to our own state of mind. One of the things that I find is when we really get busy, it's really easy to be reactive, right? So taking the time to get present again and just breathe out and do what you need to do. If you're in a moment with a child where you have a child who is, you know, behaving in a way that doesn't work, if you can get present, I don't know that you have time for always 3 things you love about the child, but find something that you can appreciate about them before approaching them, because it's really easy for us to put on the filter of, oh my gosh, this child always does X, right? And carry that into the conversation. If you can get present to something that you appreciate about the child, that really supports approaching them with from a place of responsiveness. Counting to 10, right? Just taking that time to count to 10. It's having you get that actually turns on the part of your brain. It moves you out of the amygdala and into the other part of your brain. Breathe in deeply through your nose and count out. You know, we should do this right now. We can all get present. We're going to just do one round of this, but we're going to breathe in for 5, hold for 5, and then exhale slowly. Okay, so we'll breathe in. Hold. And you can feel the difference in your body just doing that once, right? And how you can approach the situation. And this is the wet dog is one of my favorites. You start at the top of your body and you just kind of start shaking, and you can actually shake off quite a bit of tension that way and support yourself in coming in prepared. What tools do you all use when you feel yourself get reactionary and want to get back to responsiveness?
I notice the feeling of air moving in and out of my nose and center myself on that.
That's good. In the nose. Anyone else? Shannon?
I use essential oils. So I have a lavender stick that I just dab a little and smell in, or I'll put the diffuser on in the room.
And are you then present to the scent, Shannon?
Of spring milk, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else? No? Okay.
Tamara,
yes.
I like to hold my, like put a finger right in between my here and close my eyes, and I can almost like kind of feel a dot appear there, and it's just helps me center myself. If you do it, like just close your eyes and just push a little, and you can almost feel that, like you're.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Sonia. All right.
Okay. I use some visualization, just to be short. I transport myself to the mountains, like to the Andes Mountains in Colombia, and see the green. So that calms me, and I sometimes can even feel like the cool breeze, like I transport myself mentally to my place.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, so long-term tools, self-care, we talk about this a lot. This is I think especially this year, we're going to need to make sure that we're really prioritizing self-care. And sometimes I know that we think that staying up late is self-care because we get to, enjoy a movie or something, but really, I think that sleep is the primary piece of this for most of us. Visualize your day in the morning, first thing in the morning, creating your day in your mind, and really having yourself be grounded as you move into the day. Making a visual representation of your classroom goals. So I find this was really useful, having something in images that is up somewhere where I will see it, and talk and think about what does the classroom look like. So you actually are beginning with the end in mind and holding that space, and then putting reminders and quotes around your house for you to, or your classroom for you to see. All right. So we also then want to look at which brain the child is working with. I love this picture. It's a couple of years ago. A couple of these guys are now moving up to lower L. So the first thing we have to do is we have to stay present to the fact that children do well if they can, right? Children do not do well if they want to. Children do well if they can, just like we do well if we can, right? And so if we can bring that mindset to the situation, it's very, very helpful as we work with a child. I often hear from families that they're worried that the child is going to manipulate them with their behavior, I hear a lot about manipulative. If I'm kind to the child at the time when they're having a meltdown, then it'll reinforce the behavior. I have to share with you all, and I'm really embarrassed about this, but I was one of those parents who, even with 2 Montessori credentials, I really thought that my children, that if I reinforced negative behavior by really supporting them in that moment, that they were going to end up having that negative behavior reinforced. So I would often go in, if they were, in an upset or frustrated, I would either have them isolate themselves, like I would say, well, why don't you go into your room and take a little time and until you're ready to come out and be in the family, which I want you to know, if my husband ever did that to me and told me if I was upset that I could go take a little time and come back when I was ready, I would have some very choice words for him, right? So total double standard for my children, right? And the other thing I would do is go in, and when I talk to them, I was not in empathy, I was in coaching. So I wasn't yelling at them. I thought I was being a good mom because I wasn't yelling at my children. I wasn't raising my voice. I always use kind words, but I would talk to them about how they needed to work on that skill, and we don't yell and we don't slam the door, and and I would coach them, and it really did not support the connection in the relationship, and it didn't change the behavior, right? There was no behavior change. So one of the things that for me really shifted my thinking was when I took the hand-in-hand parenting class and got really present to empathy and the difference it made. And I took a 20-minute, I had a 20-minute session with Mari Lupe, who was the hand-in-hand instructor, and she started talking about the need for empathy. And I want you to know, I wasn't raised with much empathy. My parents were the oh well parents. So if something, you fell down and hurt yourself, you kind of, oh well, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself up. They were not ever abusive in any way, but there wasn't a whole lot of compassion. They didn't have that skill. So it was not something that I have come to, I've had to really work on building it, and I'm still working on it. And so Sia, my oldest, this was a couple years ago, I just come home from talking to Mara Lupe, and I realized, one of the things that I realized is I was losing my relationship with my girls. Like I was losing my relationship with Sia. She and I were not close in a way that I wanted to be. And I saw people who had close relationships with their adult children. And I knew that the relationship that we had was more with me as the coach and her as the not wanting to be coached person, was not one that was working very well. And so I decided I was going to try this, even though when Mari Lupe said, well, you actually support them when they're having a breakdown. I said, but how are they going to build independence? How are they going to know how to build the skill if I go in and rescue them? And right. So she said, you know, actually, they actually do learn the skill if the brain is supported. So we had this moment, and Georgie, I was talking to Georgie about Santa and how Santa is actually really the Christmas spirit, and we all are a part of that. And Sia got really upset, and she does not do this very often. She got up, she stormed out of the room, and she slammed her bedroom door. Well, in the past, I would have given her a little time to get herself together, and then I would have gone in and said, in our household, we don't do that. We talk to each other. I would have coached her, right? And instead, I went in immediately, and I sat on her bed, and I just put my hand on her leg, and I said, I'm really here for you. I want you to know that. Whatever you have going on right now, I'm here for you. And first of all, she looked at me like I had three heads, because who was this person who was not coming in to tell her all the things that she had just done wrong in that moment, right? And then she looked at me, and then she started talking, and she said, it took her about 10 minutes of me just saying, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. And all of this stuff came up for her. She said, I am so scared about growing up. I don't want the responsibility of adulthood. I'm afraid that I'm not going to be good at it. So we had this incredible, beautiful heart-to-heart around something that would have been closed down if I hadn't been in my responsive brain and actually looked to how to support her in moving out of her reactionary brain, right? And it was such a gift. And what ended up happening was Sia, who many of you know is fiercely independent in her spirit, she followed me around the house for 3 days, right? And it was such a shift in our relationship. And from that moment on, I got that my job with her was to support her emotionally and to help build the skill outside of the reactionary moment. And as soon as I got that with her, we have an incredibly close relationship. And it all shifted out of that empathy and out of my willingness to get out of my reactionary brain and kind of my make wrong brain and move into a responsive brain. So, and she was doing the best she knew how to do in that moment, right? It is children's job to test boundaries and experiment. You can see this is little Lila, who
these are all three my child. And that's for testing boundaries.
I was going to look for some for the school, but I just thought these were too precious and too perfect of like her really looking and experimenting and doing the best she knew how to do in that moment. She didn't know how to do any better. Like this was her exploration. Right, Margaret?
Yes, and I was very calm in all of those moments.
Well, you were calm enough to take a photo. That's good. So when we have a child that's not behaving, our job is to ask 3 questions: why, what, and how. Okay, so instead of starting a lecture, which in this case is somebody saying, if you just started earlier, you need to be more responsible. Don't you ever listen in class? I wonder why she's having a hard time. What do I want to teach, and how can I best teach it? Right? And by the way, we will take a break, about a 15-minute break at 10 o'clock. I know it's a long time to sit, so I just want you all to have that to know that. So why did the child act this way? Now, a lot of times it's hungry, they're angry, they're lonely, or they're tired. This is straight out of Daniel Siegel's work. And what we say is we're going to look for with curiosity instead of assumptions, right? So we're going to bring our curiosity to the situation. We're going to look deeper to see what might be behind the behavior, and also assess what's developmentally appropriate. Like for Lila, that's a perfect example. Those were all perfectly developmentally appropriate for her, whether or not it still makes it challenging, which is why it's such a good example. But why is the child acting this way, and really digging in? What lesson do I want to teach in this moment, right? So when we push them away, this is to speak to your question, Jasmine, like give them making good choices. What could you do to make this right? What is the lesson you want them to learn, right? A lot of you talked about discipline being about building skills. So that's a piece that many of you are already thinking about. What is the lesson here? What's the skill? And how do I build the brain in this way? The goal is discipline and not about the consequences. And what life skills may need strengthening? Do they need self-control? Do they need to be able to think about others in their community? Do they need to know how to take responsibility for their actions? Do they need to know the appropriate way to express big feelings? Like, what is the lesson that you want to teach? Sometimes there will be a lot of them. You're going to have to just choose one, right? And how can you best teach the child this lesson, right? So what can you do next time you're mad? Talk about strategies when they're mad. You've been getting a lot of screen time lately. Let's come up with a new plan. So how can you best bring the lesson in the child? Now, Dr. Montessori, those of you who are trained know that we, in our classrooms, if a child is working with a material incorrectly, unless they're hurting somebody with it or being disruptive with it, we let them keep experimenting with that, and we select another time to represent the lesson. We don't want, Dr. Montessori saw that even 125 years ago that if we came in and corrected the child in that moment, the child lost interest, right? So we have to pay attention to the moment we want to bring the lesson to the child. What's going to be the appropriate moment? Okay. How can I best teach the child this lesson? And so we want to consider the age and the developmental stage, your own and your child's emotional state. I recommend waiting, oftentimes waiting, and using collaborative problem solving. You don't need to rescue them, but they may need some help in thinking through their ideas and building a plan, right? And how to solve their own problem. Okay. Any comments, questions, thoughts on that?
I had a comment.
Yeah, Liz?
For how can I best teach the child? I find that a lot of times if I talk about like a personal experience and I feel like kind of try to relate to them, and then it's heard a lot more than if I just tell them like, if you do this, this will happen. I'll tell like a personal story about, I've done this before and this is what happened and that sort of thing, and just make that like personal connection.
That's perfect. And actually one of the kind of tricks of the trade that I teach in my parenting class, and I don't know quite how this translates into the classroom, but children actually, they engage a different part of the brain if they overhear you sharing something rather than it being directly to them. So if I had, for example, Christos and I were just talking about using this tool last night. We have a skill that we want to support Georgie in building. She hasn't had a play date since COVID, but she had a play date before COVID, and he said that she talked 98% of the time on the play date, and the child did not want to come back. Right? So now Christos and I are both talkers, right? So it's not like she didn't come to this naturally, apple tree, right? So we were talking about having a conversation with each other about having to learn that lesson and letting her overhear it where it's not about her, right? So she doesn't have to process it like, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, but we can talk about, gosh, it's so hard when you get excited and you're over talking. I just did that with Susie Q and, you know, on the phone, and she didn't really get a chance to talk. And, you know, it's hard to be friends with people when they don't let you have space. And we can talk to each other about that and even tell stories from our childhood that weave that in. And that's one of the things that's really effective to teach these skills is using stories from your own life. One of the things that, you know, I have done before, and I really try to be a very honest and forthcoming mom, but I do sometimes, you know, fabricate stories and, you know, at the dinner table to teach lessons. And so I did get called out by Georgia. She's like, talk about the time you were in Chicago and you were, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to remember what I said. So we don't always, don't put yourself in that terrible position with your children. I am a totally honest mom, except for these stories. So anyway, so but I do recommend actually that stories are a great way to teach skills, and you can use books, and you can use, and you as a classroom community can look at the skills. As long as you're looking at building the skill, it really works. Thank you for that, Liz. That was really important. Anything else? Anyone who wants to add about that? No? Okay. Okay, so I want you all to take, actually, why don't we do this? Why don't we take our break right now, and during, you know, let's do about till 10:05, which is about 21 minutes. So take some time during that break to write down for yourself, and then we'll break into groups, a behavior that you have experienced that is a repeated behavior that triggers you. Like you want it to be, this is going to be something for you to work on today as we move through this, something that may have gotten you before, something where you got stuck before, and why is the child behaving that way? What's the lesson the child needs, and how is the best way how could you bring what you were learning today to that situation? Is that clear? I feel like I wasn't clear in that. So you're going to take a situation and you're going to apply these tools to that situation. Basically, the bottom line is the thing that is the most critical piece of everything that we're doing is actually offering empathy. That is the most important first step, right? It's getting into their world. It's offering them a sense of safety and security, even as they're having this breakdown of whatever kind it is. It doesn't mean that we're stepping over it. Okay, that actually a lot of what Tina Payne Bryson talks about is you need to have high standards, and we know that our classrooms have high standards. This is not about not having high standards. This is about how do we support the children in really reaching them. So we always want to use empathy to connect. Now, the one piece I want to say is that everyone acknowledges, for example, Bevan, with your situation where there's a dangerous situation, child's about to run out in the street, you know, they're running across Times Square, you're not going to start with empathy there. You're going to start with giving them back, right? But most of the situations we're in are not dangerous situations, right? So we also want to provide clear, consistent expectations and a schedule, right? So that's a piece, and I know you all know this, but this is just to reiterate, they need that consistency, they need the clarity, and they need the follow through on the expectations every time, right? That doesn't mean rigidity. You know, there are going to be times, you know, it's Grandparents' Day and there's a different rule, you know, like they're going to need to also know how to be flexible when it's appropriate. So I'm not saying be rigid for rigidity's sake, but they do need the clear, consistent expectations. Being present and giving the gift of your full attention. that is something that can be really challenging in a classroom, and you really rely on your assistant and also the structures you put in place to offer that. Bring the golden rule of discipline to your model. Now, one of the things that I find the most effective as we're kind of navigating these conversations, and when I was early in this transition to this form of working with really my own children and with parents, is that we have to bring the golden rule. And if you are about to behave in a way that you would not like somebody to treat you, then that's your indication to stop. If you are upset, if you are raising your voice and you come in, and somebody comes in and treats you the way that we've been conditioned to treat children when they're behaving like that, most of us would not like it. Right? So how would I feel if I were having this emotion or this behavior, and how would I want someone to treat me? One of the things that we've really started to learn in our family is that if somebody's in a bad mood, it's not the time to separate from them, it's the time to bring them closer. If you have a student who's struggling that day, that's not the time to isolate them or have them go off by themselves. It's the time to bring them in closer and to love on them and make sure that they know that they feel loved, because that's actually what heals the issue. It's not the separation, right? Anyone have any comments or thoughts on any of these pieces? I'm going to keep moving if not, but no. Okay.
I may be getting ahead.
Please.
I'm thinking, because most of my teaching this year is going to be virtual, I'm thinking about how to read those signals of someone who's feeling isolated or not having a good day, or someone said something to them, how to read that over the screen, and then what to do about it in the Zoom setting.
That's a great question. Have you other online virtual types, have you all been thinking about that at all?
I can say something that I saw last year. I mean, the first couple weeks of school, the first couple weeks of virtual learning, everyone was so excited, and it was this really great novelty. I have a feeling it will probably be the same the first couple weeks, and then after a couple weeks, you could see it. You could see in their faces and their eyes, like, if things were starting to dip, or if they were feeling a little bit different, or what have you. So I think it does present itself. As long as we're all observing how everyone is going every day, and eventually, I don't know a better way to say it, but like I could see it in certain children's faces, when I saw them, so anyway.
And did you keep them afterwards, Bevan? How did you support them?
So I would invite them to stay after the call was over, or if I noticed it kept going, I would reach out to the parents and just check in and make sure, or see if everything was all right.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Jasmine, it would be great if you would shoot out an email to the guide too, like noticing so-and-so is feeling this way, and it may reinforce, Brad reaching out to the family as well, because you don't have to be the sole person. It's a great question. Yeah, Brad?
Every time I spoke with a student one-on-one, I would always begin with questions about their emotional state and really asking into how are they doing? How are they coping with the situation? And that was an entree to them being able to express their frustration or feel or state, how they were feeling, and, just talk about it. So not everyone has that opportunity to have one-on-one time with the students. But that kind of check-in was nice, and I got genuine responses from the children that sometimes they weren't doing so good. We talked about it.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay. All right. Find your own grounding and understand your emotional state. What you all hear me talk about this a lot, but make sure your own empathy bucket is full. having somebody for you to really unload with is really going to be critical. I do not recommend that this be a spouse or a partner or even a friend or a sibling, because sometimes you actually may need to say something about them. And so it's nice if it's somebody outside of that circle, so that you can really just kind of let it rip and have a place where it's safe and you're unconditionally held. And the nice thing about having a listening partner is that they don't offer any advice or any coaching. It's just listening and holding the space. Acknowledge your own triggers. For some of us, there's a lot of work to be done in recognizing those. So really start to pay attention and do the work so that you recognize your own triggers and can own them and be responsible for them. Another big piece is to take responsibility when you do not behave as you would have liked. Our students need to see that. The truth is, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to have it be perfect every time you're working with children. Sometimes you're going to knock it out of the park, and other times you're going to stumble. And to own it when you stumble and say, hey, I really, I didn't like how I acted there, or I really didn't like how I left you feeling, and own that really makes a big difference. It's important that we really pay attention that love and acceptance cannot be attached to behavior. It's one of the pitfalls of really having it be that that you only like the child when they're showing up the way you want them to like. That's a piece of why empathy is so important, that they know that they're loved and accepted no matter, who is showing up. It doesn't mean you're going to let them hit you. It doesn't mean you're going to any of those things, but it does mean that you really have a space in your heart for the child, no matter how they're showing up that day. So when a child is not able to behave as you might like, the first step is to connect with them. And then the second step is to redirect. Okay. So this is what and we're not going to get all through these today. I knew we wouldn't. It's okay. Like, we're going to go through at our own pace. We have time later. That's beautiful. I love not having kind of any pressure around any of this. But these are the redirection strategies straight out of No Drama Discipline. And we'll go over each one of these. Reduce words, embrace emotions, describe, don't preach. Involve your child in the discipline, reframe a no into a conditional yes, emphasize the positive, creatively approach the situation, and teach mindsight tools. Okay, we'll talk about that. So, reduce words. This is a really important one. We can get really verbose when we're working with children, particularly older children. I think the toddlers tend to do, the toddler team tends to do a good job of this. But say what you see, and there cannot be any judgment or criticism, just what is so. I see shoes at the front door. I notice you haven't started your homework. These are ones for home. I see that you're not ready to go outside yet, right? I see you haven't put on your inside shoes yet. I see that your backpack's on the floor. I see that your snack is still left on the table, right? So it's just saying what you see without the judgment and without the criticism. I notice, and I even like to take out the you, because the you can feel a little accusatory. I notice that I don't have your assignment yet, right? Not even you haven't turned in your assignment. I notice I don't have your assignment yet. And actually the next step with Ross Green then is to say, what's up, right? It's that easy. I see that you don't have your assignment turned in. All right, I see that I've noticed that I don't have your assignment yet. What's up? And then you listen, right? So this is terrible images. This is because I did these instead of Margaret. So this is straight from the toddler section, but I thought these were really helpful as far as reducing words. Connect and address the feeling behind the behavior. Oh, are you feeling, this is what it says, I don't know if you guys can read it. Oh, are you feeling frustrated? It's hard to wait sometimes. So you really acknowledge how the child is feeling, and then address the behavior. Hitting hurts, right? Give alternatives. Be gentle with my body, please, or whatever. This is the lesson that you're teaching, the how, right? And oftentimes with the older students, you're going to want to ask them what they can do to make it right. You want to engage their thinking brain. One of the things we want to really stay away from is doing all the thinking for the children. That's, I think, a pitfall of our whole culture right now is the children are not really having a lot of time to think for themselves. And then we move on, right? We're not going to make this into a big thing. We're going to, let's go outside and move on. We don't want this to have to ruin the child's day or your day, right? Any thoughts about reducing the words or addressing the misbehavior? No. Margaret, again, I can only see 4 people, so just embracing emotions. Give the freedom to feel safely. I kept these pictures in here because this was a day Georgie's cousins climbed this tree and her sister very quickly, and Georgie's too young, and in our world is our rule is if you can't get into it yourself, you're not ready for it, right? And just these guys are pretty high up. So she worked on it, and then she had a complete meltdown that she could not get up there. And that was okay. It's okay for them to have those feelings. It's okay for them to have that experience. One of the things that we often do is we try to silence children's emotions. And this is a big piece culturally. We say hush, we will say, oh, it's okay, or you're gonna be okay. And I want you to think about the last time that somebody said to you when you were upset, oh, it's going to be okay. My mom used to say that to me. Oh, honey, it's okay. Or this is her other line. Oh, well, right? And like, what do I do with that? And so that is not like the part of what happens is we're teaching children that their feelings don't matter. And a huge part of what happens right now is that children learn happy, sad. They learn the emotions happy, sad, angry, but they don't have the access to the full breadth of their emotions. And really, we don't want to silence them. We want them to learn so that they're not, 50 years old and having to do the work of learning, of knowing themselves. We want them to understand their emotions. We want them to address the emotion and not just gloss over it. If you think about the use of alcohol, drugs, television, any kind of coping mechanisms that people are using when they're not wanting to feel their emotions, a piece of that is because emotions weren't validated, or that's one way they can get there. So we want to really, they're not used to looking at their emotions. We want to support children in how they feel and having access to the words and that experience and then moving through it rather than denying it. Okay, so just take about a minute here to think about the ways that you may silence children's emotions. Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't, you welcome them and you embrace them. But what are some of the things that you may be communicating with the children in your classroom that have them not think that their emotions are okay? We'll just take a minute. Okay, anybody want to share something? I know it takes a lot of bravery to share this, but a way that you may have inadvertently been hushing an emotion or an instinct, or maybe a way you were brought up? Yeah, Patty?
Maybe saying, oh, it's not a big deal for something that happened. Because obviously it's a big deal to them.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing I see people say. They're like negotiating with the child. Why are you this upset? It's just a cookie. There's another cookie right here, or whatever it is, right? One of the things that Hand in Hand says is that actually that's emotion that needs to get up and out. It's not actually about the cookie. It's about that they have these emotions going on inside. So really giving them access to that is really important. And I think that's, and as adults, it's again the golden rule, right? If we're upset about something and somebody says, why are you so upset about this? It's not a big deal. Like, how does that land for us, right? We're not interested in being treated like that. That's not somebody that you keep as a friend for very long, right? Anyone else have anything to share?
I will say that sometimes we say, I know, like, I know you feel bad. I don't know. Like, I really cannot feel for the other person. So sometimes we try to validate, and the other person like, no, you don't know what I'm feeling. Right. And so it's attached to what you were just saying. And the other thing, sometimes I say, we all feel that like that. So trying to validate is like, yeah, but I don't feel like that. Like, I don't want to feel better. I don't feel better right now.
And sometimes we don't want to feel better, right? It's okay to have a moment where we just want to be in whatever it is. And then I talked to somebody about something that happened. Actually, it was Sherry Wolf. We were talking about something that was upsetting. And she said, yeah, I gave myself 2 days to be in mourning about it. And then she's, and Sherry has that resilience, that beautiful, amazing resilience. So, okay. When we don't acknowledge or we invalidate a child's feelings, or we communicate, I'm not interested in your feelings, or how you feel is not valid. Then children begin to share their internal experiences with us less if they don't think that their feelings matter. They learn to stuff their feelings, and they learn to hide vulnerability. And I know many of us are, in recovery around hiding our vulnerability our whole lives, right? Like, it's something that we can grow up doing, thinking that we're not able to share it. So when you're working with children on these emotions, one of the things that we want to do is help them distinguish between the feelings and the actions, and help them have strategies for different actions. So it's okay to feel angry at Rosa right now, but we don't yell at each other. Let's talk about other ways to express it, right? This is a conversation you could have it with a 4 or a 5 or a 8 or a 9 or 11-year-old even. Like, it's okay to be angry. Like, we want to validate that it's okay to have these emotions. We don't want to sweep them away. Or, I understand you feel angry right now, but we can't hit each other. I'll stay with you while you calm down, and then we can talk about other ways to express your anger, right? So you're giving them the support, you're giving them the opportunity to feel their feelings, you're not shoving them aside, and you're going to support them in the how, like how they're going to build the skill. Any thoughts or comments on that? Okay. The other thing is, and I share this really more for the parents here rather than the guides, because I think we as educators realize we're not responsible for the children's happiness. But for those of you who are parents, it's really important for us to remember that we are not responsible for our children's happiness, and they're not responsible for ours. Each human being is responsible for their own happiness. And so that doesn't mean that we're not responsible for how we occur for our child and bringing shame and guilt and all of that. But I think it's a really scary spiral when we think that we have to have them be happy all the time. The truth is that adults are not happy all the time, and it is a setup. I think it is a setup for children nowadays, culturally, to have this experience of always being in this bubble where somebody's always working to have them be happy or entertained or engaged, or and when they don't, the whole world stops. And guess what? You become an adult, and I don't have anybody running around trying to make sure that I'm happy at all. Like, that is not a part of my adult experience. If I'd had that growing up, adulthood would be a really big disappointment and a bummer. And really, I think it's a piece of how we end up with people who we work with who expect that the world will revolve around what works for them rather than being able to look at what works for the community as a whole. So this is a piece that I really, offer for the family, the parents, because so often there's all this pressure for our children to be happy all the time, and actually it's not a service to them. It's not a service to the children to carry that. So, describe, don't preach. Say what you see. We talked about this a little bit. Observations. You're throwing cards. That makes it hard to play the game. You left your dishes on the snack table. You do not have your coat on, and we need to leave for recess. So again, you're using, Montessorians have skills of observation. You are saying what you see, and you are sharing that. And notice there's no preaching, there's no and blah, 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 no coaching, none of that in the guise of, because really usually that's a make wrong. When you talk like that, like I notice or I see, you're much less likely to put the child on the defensive, and then the child has to think through how to handle it. It's different, if I say even to Georgie in the house, you didn't clear the table, please go take care of that. I have not had her brain turn on. I have done the thinking for her, and she's just following instructions. It's very different to say the table is still has the dishes on it from dinner, and then let her come up with the solution, right? It gives the child the opportunity to observe and decide how they're going to respond, and it engages them in a conversation. Involve the child in the discipline. Ask questions. Can you help me understand what happened? Or I can't figure this out. I can't figure this out. Can you help me understand? Maybe that would be a good example of the torn paper. Can you help me understand what happened here? Right? And if the child tells you, I got angry and I tore the paper, that's the perfect thing. They're taking ownership. They're taking responsibility. They're being honest. They're being vulnerable. They're acknowledging their emotion. We could not actually ask for anything more in their response in that moment. And we're really that means we've built this relationship with the child where they feel comfortable telling us the truth and owning how they feel. Bi-directional dialogue. So instead of top down, which is one directional, right? Like you're going to, or go do this, or you must. It's, I've noticed, this is the Ross Green again, I've noticed blank, any ideas, or I've noticed X, what's up with that, right? So you're engaging them in the conversation. Okay, this is going to be the last one we're going to do for today, and then we're going to wrap up, okay? But this, I love this. They have a book, Tina, Dr. Bryson and Dr. Siegel have a book called The Yes Brain, and it's a whole book. So, but it talks a lot about how actually when we hear a no, The no can actually occur as violence to the brain, which is so interesting, because I want you to know, early in my marriage, whenever my husband would say no to me, I would say, I don't like it when you say no to me. And he's like, you don't like when anybody says no to you. But now I'm like, see, it's violence to my brain. So anyway, but really what happens is it shuts down the brain, right? So anytime we can turn the no, and it doesn't mean that children shouldn't hear no sometimes, we're not saying that, but anytime we can turn the no into a conditional yes. So yes, you can have another snack tomorrow, right? Instead of no more snack. It's a different, it lands differently in the brain, and it keeps the child engaged with you rather than having the brain shut down. It stimulates the brain into social engagement behavior rather than activating the reactive state. So the no often can put them in fight, flight, or freeze. It builds, I love this is part of the yes brain, but the perspective mind, the ability to imagine a future and create the future actions. We want them living into the future. We want them thinking about the future. So this is the opportunity for them to build that yes into the future brain, rather than no, I can't get what I want, my brain closes down. It also builds delayed gratification, right? When you say no, there's not any realization for a child that it's coming again. We want them to know that if they wait, they can have great things. They can have what they want in their lives. So, and that's a really important skill for many of our children. I will tell you, many of our children are not waiting for much at home. Not all, by any means, but there are certainly a lot of them who even with the best parents who are deeply committed to parenting, they're not having to wait for very long for anything. This is really important for them. And it gives them the practice at tolerating disappointment and builds resilience. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. And this is what I'd like to do is just our last bit of time today. I'm going to stop the share. Okay. And what I'd love to do is to take a little time and two things. One thing that you would like to take with you. You remember 80% of what you speak and 20% of what you hear. So if there's something that you want to make sure that you take with you out of today, I'd love you to share that just briefly, because we have a number of people and we're going to go through everybody. And the second thing is, if anybody has something they want to make sure that we cover at some point, please make sure you can chat that, you can say it at the same time, but I want to make sure that there's a place also as you all are forward thinking and looking at the future. Okay, right. So I'm just going to go top to bottom, left to right, like we read. So Kim, that puts you up first. Is there a tool that you want to take away with you today, or something that you want to remember?
Who did you call on, Tamara?
Oh, Kim.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I don't mean to put you on the spot. We're just doing a tool that you would like to take with you today.
No.
I mean, I think I read No Drama Discipline for Grayson, and I've been focusing on a lot of the tools for him. I think just the reminder to sort of stop and focus on like why I'm being triggered by certain things. That's something that I need to just keep working on, and I like having it at the front of my brain from the workshop.
Beautiful. Great. Thank you. Tressie, and then I don't know if Emily's there, but if she is, and then Jasmine, okay?
I guess I'm just trying to figure out some more of the things that trigger me and how I can handle them.
And be present. Yeah.
Present and embrace the emotions.
Great. And your own too, right? Like the thing is, I think we make it wrong that we get triggered, and we're beautiful human beings, and being triggered is one of these spices of life. right? It's okay for all of us to have this experience, and it's one of the things I love about being a teacher and being in education is really the demand that we consistently be growing, right? And stepping into our greatest self. So thanks. Emily?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you
I
hear me?
saw you unmuted. Yeah, great.
The takeaway is just the noticing, I think, and just make sure I start everything with I notice, and I think that will help a lot.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Jasmine, then Beth, and Marcella.
My takeaway, actually, I had a moment a few minutes ago, I had to turn my video off, where I got to utilize these things immediately. Coming from a place of, I thought I was pretty empathetic before, but really not being reactive and thinking, what's at the heart of this behavior is the biggest takeaway for me. And also, I'm going to spend some time thinking about strategies for those how questions, how to teach this behavior, both for my home and also in my short period of time with students online. So.
Yep. That's a hard job for you guys who have them only a short time, but that's great. That's beautiful. And maybe you can collaborate with the elementary team on some of those hows too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beth?
Just remembering that sometimes a meltdown is cathartic and we need it and they need it, and just let it happen and we'll deal with it after we get it all out.
Yeah, and just to love them through it, right? The way that we want to be loved through our meltdowns.
Right? Or maybe just left alone for a minute.
Well, but you're able to say that, right? And there are children who want to be left alone, for sure. For sure. That is for sure.
I'm not going far, but I'm not getting in the middle of it.
That's right. That's right. Marcella, and then Brad, and then Sherry.
So something that I'm working on during my meditation, and this bring it up again, is act and don't react.
Mm-hmm.
So breathe, count to 10, observe, and ask the question. So the question that I have is, can you help me understand what happened? One of the lessons I put, because sometimes we don't even know what's going on. So act, don't react. And yeah, it's okay. And it's okay to feel bad or have failures, and that those failures don't define you. So you're not your failures. It's just a moment.
It's just a moment. That's beautiful. Brad?
I really want to remember to consistently use the I noticed phenomena and not write intention over that phenomena. That's something I try to practice in general. But I really want to remember, once we've gotten to a calmer place, giving the children the power and saying, how can you make this right? How can we make this right? Mm-hmm. Rather than, imposing anything, giving them that responsibility and having faith that they can figure out a way.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And it may be collaborative, right? Like you may need to, like Margaret was saying yesterday, like they may come up with something that completely doesn't work, and you may have to ask some questions to support that. So
I want to write a play as an apology.
That's right. Sherry, and then Margaret.
Sherry, me, right?
Sherry, you, yes.
I like to take a deep breath and count to 5 and try to remember 3 things that you like about, and I don't work with the children so much, but I think I can use that with adults as well. Sometimes you remember that before you approach them when you're dealing with something. So
that's right. Thank you. Margaret, and then Stacy, and then Patty.
When I read all this, the comforting and the empathizing part comes naturally to me, but then the follow-up doesn't. Like, how do you teach the lesson? And in particular, I'm hoping we can talk about how you work on empathy, because to me, that's just sort of a normal human emotion. So it's hard for me to relate when a child just says, oh, don't worry, you ran over a squirrel. There's lots of squirrels, kind of thing.
Right.
And it's like, where do you go from there? And then building resilience too.
Yeah.
When a child so easily falls apart when something doesn't go their way. So I'm hoping we can kind of like dig into some specifics, or at least how to brainstorm how to teach to a specific point. Because then my mind goes blank. Like, now what?
I love that. Okay, I'm writing it down.
Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. Stacy put something in the chat. I saw her mic's not working. Stacy, I hope we're getting you a computer that works with a working mic. Let's work on that so that you have that. I'd like to share a lot of these strategies with my families on how to communicate with their children. They will have children learning at home this year. Supporting them with positive behavior, feedback, and understanding their triggers will be huge to everyone's success. My discipline will be limited on the teacher and greater on the parent end. So giving them tools and education is important. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yep. Patty?
Definitely being responsive and not reactive. Something I have to keep in mind, to acknowledge my own state of mind and my emotional state and what triggers me so that I'm not as easily triggered. And then just describe, don't preach. I thought was really good. Describe what you see objectively rather than preaching.
Great. Perfect. Shannon, and then Melissa, and then Liz Hamilton.
My takeaway is I'd like to read The Yes Brain. I think it would be really, because I read this book last year, I really liked it. It did help me with some children I was stymied by. It just really helped me restore that connection. I liked Beth's strategy of offering an alternative, like pulling the dog's tail hurts. This is how he likes to be pet, offering those alternatives. And I agree that what she said, meltdowns can be cathartic. I do think that the feelings rise up to be released. So sometimes what I see adults doing is like they try to intervene and stop the child from crying, but that can be really important for them to just get it all out. So just letting yourself be uncomfortable in that moment and just staying there with them and letting it fully be dissipated. It's just a reminder to myself.
Beautiful, beautiful. And for each other too, right? Like actually allowing us, because we have those emotions too. That's beautiful. Melissa, and then Liz Hamilton.
So I think my main takeaway was when you said not having it be like a double standard. Like, we're not expected to act a certain way. We can be upset and have those emotions, but we always expect children to be like perfect and happy. And I go through that a lot with my daughter because she's 2.5 and so different from me. She's very feisty. So it's a struggle, but realizing that her emotions are still real and, need to be heard and expressed. And with that, just modeling my behavior better for her so that she sees like that empathy and how we interact with people, and so that she can learn from that too.
Oh, great. Perfect. Thank you. Liz?
There we go. I think something that I do that I want to change that we talked about was really ask the child what's going on and don't just assume, and let them voice how they're feeling. And then another thing that I think I want to try to do more of is involve them in the solution. Sometimes I'm just like moving so fast and I'm just like, quick change. Okay, here we go. But I find that, when I do involve them in the solution and they feel like they're part of it, they behave in the way that I wanted them to in the first place, but they did it from them, not because I told them to.
Right. And then it becomes a part of their self-construction, right? As a human being, then they own it and they can bring it to the next situation. So that's such a beautiful distinction. When we make them do it, they're not building that inner drive. When they choose it, they have power in the situation in a very different way. And they know how to solve a problem from that place. So that's beautiful. Kalai? Kalai, and then Sherry White, and then Janusha and Maggie.
My takeaway is to work with the kids to find the solution for themselves, because I feel that's worked so well with my own kid. Instead of just directing them, I mean, as a parent, I don't want to brain tease him and find his own solution right now. But I think this is the right thing to do for them to work independently. So I think I should be just a guide sitting with him to make his own choices. Just go through the process of him making, or like a child making a choice. It's very hard, but I think that's what I'm going to be working this year.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. And that would be a great thing to list as a goal for yourself with when you're working on your goals. So, Sherry?
I think for me, becoming more aware of my own triggers, and also just having the tools to not preach.
I'm a preacher right here. Totally.
I'm
yeah.
gonna work on that.
I'm reformed though. I'm making progress. Janusha and Maggie.
For me, it's interesting because I've been sitting here the whole time reflecting as I am as a parent, as well as and then how it's a double standard there. Like I'm different with the toddlers than I am with my own children, and I'm such a preacher. And yeah, that's a hard habit. It's that to step out of, but
and you're the only one who's having to listen to all this with somebody who's actually grown up with you sitting right next to you saying,
this has been very hard and very awkward, I gotta say. like do you remember me doing that? Like, you know, this is weird. This is a weird situation. I don't really care for it. No, but it's like full on reflection right here. So
yeah.
But you know, just there, I took a lot away from this, like, you know, remembering to stay present in the moment. And I struggle with wanting to make my kids happy. You know, that's a big one for me. So, yeah.
Yep. Beautiful. Thanks, Janusha. How about you, Maggie?
I think I really took away a lot of tips on how to talk to the children and how to handle different things.
Good. This is a good way to start, I think. Right? Good. Thank you. Gretchen, and then Lydia, and then Shweta.
I loved your story about going up with Sia to the bedroom, and that was very visceral for me, and really like reminded me like empathy. So I'll definitely take that away. Thank you.
Beautiful. Lydia?
Yeah, some of the little phrases that are sticking with me, definitely same story. I'm here for you. I'm ready to help you. How can I help you? These kinds of things, just being super present. And also just trying, like with my kids, I feel like it's such a magical thing when you put the words of how they're feeling, whatever their struggle is. When you put that to words for them, it's a huge gift. They don't know what the words are.
Well, and candidly, Lydia, I think for all of us, right, when somebody says, wow, are you feeling this way? And they ask and they actually hit it, or they listen when, if we wanted to, you know, no, I'm not quite feeling angry, but I feel really unsettled, disquieted, right? Like, what a gift. What a gift. Yeah, thank you. Shweta, and then Laura Kellum, and then Sharon.
I'm taking back embracing the child's emotion and, you know, like not validating. Those were very important. I mean, like it just gave me a new insight. And then giving the child an opportunity to think for themselves. That's what I take back.
Great. Thank you. Laura, and then Sharon.
For me, one of the big takeaways is the turning the no into a conditional yes. Because for me, that takes a lot of thought, you know, before the words come out of your mouth, because your instinct is no. And so therefore also taking that time to process, you know, the way we're going to teach the lesson and what the actual outcome that we are going to be okay with.
Perfect. Thank you. Sharon?
Yes, I think one of the takeaways for me is children do well if they can. They're not choosing to display this particular behavior. They're just struggling. That really kind of spoke to me.
Beautiful. Thank you. Sonia and then Tammy.
My takeaway is, can you help me understand? Because we might be seeing a trigger, like, you know, a reaction on their face, and it could totally be from a different, something that has happened and it's just they're upset. And it's hard because you just want to assume, and sometimes that intention to overhelp and calm them down, they just need to let it out. We just have to be there to make sure that they're not hurting themselves or anybody else.
That's right.
And personally, I think I've been working on, you know, not having double standards with my own family. It is, and it's hard, but I think right now I'm more successful than failing. It's a work in progress. It's just the way we grew up. Our parents didn't share their struggles with us, like everything, like how hard things are. So, you know, it's just that you just pretend, but I'm trying to be more open. But believe me, I mean, I know that my husband is not at the right, you know, he's not there with me yet. He still doesn't want to explain, like not explain, but like say what is hard. It's like they don't need to worry. It's like, you know, so it's just, it's hard when one parent is doing it and the other parent is like, yay! Like, why is mom complaining? It comes out like, you know, I'm complaining too much and I'm just pointing out things or like saying things, and the other person is like, hey, all is well.
Yeah, that is tough. That is tough.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Tammy, and then Christia, and then Michelle. Yeah.
Takeaway for me is not to base how I feel about the child on how they are behaving at the time. That goes into remembering what I like about the child to begin with. And then that also goes into me being fully present and asking myself and trying to figure out, you know, why is this behavior happening, and what can I do to help it?
Perfect. Beautiful. That's a nice summary. Christia?
For me, my takeaway is be present, be there for the child, and empathize with them, and also list 3 things you love about the child before you do it.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Michelle?
Well, I found that I thought I was using all the same tools and techniques with my own child that I use in my classroom, but like Danusha had said, I'm failing at some. But I did recognize something that, you know, when T gets frustrated or upset, like he's always just left the room and gone to his room and done his thing, and I've always left him because I'm a lot like that myself. I'm very impulsive with my emotions, and I prefer to be like, give me 5 minutes and then I'll come back. And I guess I just assumed he needed that too. But like in the classroom, I don't do that. You're right. Like I support them. I sit there. I'm here for you. But I haven't done that with T. So I'm anxious to try that and go in and just do the same thing I do with the young children and say, I'm here for you if you need me.
Beautiful. We call it, just so you know, in our house, like when now this isn't when they're upset, where they're, crying about something different, but when they're having a temper tantrum, which luckily those have kind of weaned out, but we call it staring into the leaf blower, where you literally have somebody coming at you and it's just coming and coming, and really giving them going in emotionally prepared to stare into the leaf blower so that I can just be in a space of love while that all comes out. And we had a moment, and just a very quick story with Georgie. This was several years ago, but her job was emptying the dishwasher, or one of her jobs, and it was time for her to empty the dishwasher, and we said, we can't do the rest of the dishes, and she just fell to pieces. And so I followed her into her room and went in, and and it was clearly not about the dishwasher, right? Like, that's a piece of it. It's not about the thing we think it's about, right? It's that they're carrying this. So she just starts going, and she says, "You're the worst mother in the world. You're a monster. You're awful." And she just keeps coming. Christmas comes by. He's like, "You got this? Are you sure?" I'm like, "No, I've got it. Like, I'm right." And she finished, and she came over and she said, "Mom, thanks so much for hanging in there with me. I'm going to go empty the dishwasher now." And then the next day we were sitting on the swing together, and she said, "When I was little and I got sick, I remember being so scared in the hospital." And so what they say in hand is, as those emotions come up and out, these other things that they're carrying can actually can come up and out after. So when you loosen things up and you give them space for that, particularly with parenting, you're giving them the opportunity to have these kind of things that they've internalized and carried in this weight that they've carried, and they're able to articulate it and let that go as well. So for what it's worth, we call it staring into the leaf blower. So, Allison, and then Karen, and those are our last two. And thank you all for your patience.
I think for me, just really remembering to always let the children let out those emotions. I always want to jump in and kind of walk through it right then and there, but kind of stepping back and coming back to the conversation once they're feeling a bit more calm and I'm feeling a bit more calm, and it'll be more effective.
Great. Perfect. Karen, are you there? Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, perfect. Do you have one, Karen?
Yes. So I think my takeaway today, it's a lot to reflect on, really
Yes.
a lot. And my takeaway is to find strategies for I don't know what it was called, but for me to calm down first and don't react so quick, like to count to 5 and to do the breathing thing, and just I need to have that time to think before I act.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but it was beautiful. So it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, which is why we're gonna do 2 more sessions on Wednesday afternoons, just so you all know. We'll do another one in October, and then we'll do probably another one in January. So we have an opportunity to reflect on it, talk about what's working, what's not working, problem solve together, and like that. I just want to say thank you. You all have given really your complete attention, your focus, your time. You've been completely present. And I think what I really feel like what's happened today is there's been a framework around language, like to Stacy's point, that can be shared with your parents when they talk about discipline and it's coming up. And we'll have alignment as a school community around these pieces. And the other thing that I really am hoping will happen is that we'll keep asking these hard questions around it, and as a community, we can dig into those and really figure out who we are as a community in response to some of these things. So thank you so much. Your work is the most important work in the world, as far as I can tell. Being a teacher, you are the most important leader to your children. And our work is changing the world. And this work, this specific work of the discipline and speaking to children and holding them with grace and with respect, will form how they treat every other person in their lifetime. Like, it's that important. Thank you for bringing your full attention and your full engagement. And we'll see you all later this week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.